did you have like growing up, did you have any major influences? Like anyone you looked up to, an athlete or another personal trainer, maybe a parent or whoever, did you have anyone that like led you towards this path?
Honestly, not really. Like I said, it's weird because like I played sports growing up, but I didn't have an interest from a health perspective or a fitness perspective. It was more so just because I enjoyed playing the sports. I like the competition. So I never really had like a specific person that I looked up to. I mean, I love sports. I've looked up to various athletes, but nothing that inherently led me to this career. I will say, even today, like two of my favorite athletes are Tom Brady and LeBron James, who, it's kind of amazing because they're really good examples of people who, I mean, I would say LeBron James is very genetically gifted. Tom Brady, maybe not as much so in terms of, like physical strength and fitness.
Yeah.
You see the amount of effort they put into their recovery, into their strength training, into everything that goes into that. And that's why they've been able to have, 20 plus year careers is, literally the best players in their sports. So even, where I'm at today, that just shows me, we've come so far as a society with our technology and all the information we know about training and nutrition and how you can really enhance, the prime of your career, whatever, your sport entails, whether you're like a team sport athlete like them, or if you just have your own fitness goals. A lot of people think you turn 30 years old and then like the rest of your like fitness goes away for the rest of your life. But like, I want to be able to show and help people. And you can see firsthand with a lot of these athletes, how, you can still be in the prime of your career into your 30s, 40s, and maybe beyond that. So it's, I think the human body is like amazing, and it's crazy what you can accomplish, even if you don't have the amazing genetics with, really good training and nutrition and recovery.
No, that was like an amazing point. Cause back, like, I don't even know, like 10 or 20 years ago, like the prime of an athlete was maybe 25 to 30 years old. Now, like, I think recently I heard like Tom Brady was like, yeah, I'm trying to play 5 more years, and he's like 40 right now. And five, like, or LeBron, he was even saying like he's waiting for his son to be in the NBA. He wants to play with his son, so he'll be like 40 as well. So it's just crazy how the prime age is increasing more and more as science and technology increase.
Interesting, because with athletes, I was talking to my friend who's a physical therapist, and he does a lot of sports rehabilitation stuff, and he's like, it's interesting to see because, as you mentioned, it's also a lot of the mental game that comes into play. You have the elites like LeBron, Tom Brady, Cristiano Ronaldo, and Lionel Messi. Like, they're like freaks of nature. Their genetics are elite, and the work they put in to be able to, especially in that kind of like contact sports where they're literally being hit over and over again at high speed, to be able to play beyond like 35, 36, 37. Italian soccer, they go up to like 40 years old. That's just impressive to see that, how they're able to survive that. If I would say, I think, and this is what my friend was saying, that if we were to even try to perform at the level even in our 20s, it would be difficult without the capability that we're doing.
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, again, genetics definitely do play like a pretty big role, but I think even you can just see, across every single sport, many of the athletes are going to be very genetically gifted, but, not everyone does. It just totally depends. And you still see in general, like the average age of people in their prime across all the sports, independent of their individual genetics, is really gradually gone up over the years. Like if you go back like decades ago, people, like I said, people would be like at 30 years old, depending on the sport, like their career might be over. But now you see with technology, people have been advanced into their 40s and potentially beyond that, depending on the sport.
Absolutely. And recently, I don't remember what sport it was, soccer or basketball, but there was a player that retired. I think it might be basketball, because he had a really irregular heartbeat.
Yeah, LaMarcus
Aldridge. Yeah. So it's, again, you have those two ends, in the elite sport. Like, you got people retiring early because of we would assume that athletes are the most fittest people on earth, but then you also have this side to it.
Yeah, sometimes it's kind of unfortunate, like injuries and stuff like that. Sometimes it's just completely random, and like, we do have research on different exercise and recovery strategies that seem to be effective for reducing your risk of injury. But, something like a heart condition, a lot of times it's just completely out of your control. People, LaMarcus Aldridge is like 7 feet. People who are just super large. Sometimes they just have, just unique health conditions at a younger age, even though, the rest of their genetics are, incredible. But, sometimes it's just by random bad luck that things like that happen.
You said research, and we looked at your Instagram, and I know you're big on research. And we were just talking about athletes like Cristiano Ronaldo and LeBron, and they're not training like how they were training at 20 or 25. There's more ways to improve your training, but make it easier on your body. So what I wanted to bring up was you're into research. How much have we delved into muscular development and performance? How much research do we know as a scientific community? Is there a lot of things that we know? Is there a lot of unknowns that there are out there, or how much is there out there?
Yeah, I would say overall we have a really strong foundation on but I would say like the most important fundamental training principles for strength, muscle growth, et cetera. Like those kind of the mechanisms and some of the basic training principles we have outlined pretty well. There's been a lot of research published in the last mostly like 20, 30 years on resistance training for like a wide variety of, from a variety of perspectives. And I think now we're getting to the point where we're conducting like more in-depth literature on like specific topics. So an example I think of is, a basic training principle for strength and hypertrophy is training volume. And we've had like an enormous amount of literature published in the last, like I said, 20 years on training volume. We even have, systematic reviews and meta-analysis now, which are basically like the highest level of evidence because they're essentially just a study of all the studies on a given topic. So we even have several of those. But what we see now is researchers are starting to conduct like individual studies on specific training questions that maybe your average gym goer has and has always wanted to answer. So for example, like going back to training volume, we've seen in the past couple of years that researchers have started to, instead of giving people like, you're going to do 5 sets per week or 10 sets per week, you essentially just individualize their training volume from what they're already doing. So rather than, because everybody does different amount for their training.
Yeah.
What you can see is, if we just take your baseline training and then just bump it up a little bit, how does that affect your strength? How does that affect your muscle growth? Those are usually the two primary outcomes. And what you see is some people respond really, really well to like a higher training volume, whereas for other people, it's not as effective. And in rare cases, sometimes it's too much and then you actually decrease in strength or muscle growth. So it just shows you that, training is super individualized. And, we just talked about genetics, and that's a huge reason why. But, everybody has a different lifestyle, and there's so many different factors for why somebody might respond better to a given training program than somebody else. So I think you see, athletes, you're talking about, how do LeBron and Cristiano Ronaldo train? They've probably trained very differently over the course of their training career. Sure. Maybe early on, they were able to tolerate very heavy loads, very heavy training volumes. Whereas now, especially in the middle of their seasons, they probably perform very little training volume and probably at a much lower intensity level. Yeah. So you can just see over the course of time, we've just had a lot more in-depth knowledge on certain topics, which has shaped how, some of your average basic gym goer can train and how even elite athletes are able to train.
Now, that's really interesting that you bring that up, because every time, I think that's the very common misconception that people have, that, and we talk about it over and over again, that why can't I train like that person? Or why can't I look like that person? Or that person's doing 4 plates or 3 plates and I'm only stuck at 2. I mean, people don't realize that it's, of course, over time, it changes. And of course, it's your own capability, because recently there's also research that there's a maximum muscle building threshold that every person has. Like there's a max limit. Beyond that, they will not go. So I think that's something that's very important to get into. Now, we're talking about research and, as you mentioned, different sets, different reps, different ranges. What would you say is the difference between training to failure versus as many reps as possible? Because I know that a lot of times we have sets and we train to failure, but at the same time, when we're doing circuits, we have the AMRAP, as many reps as possible. So what has research shown, and in your experience with your clients or someone that you've worked with, how does that differ person to person, and what it actually is?
Yeah, usually the difference between like an AMRAP set and training to failure is it's just in the technical lingo. So usually the way you would distinct failure, and which seems to be pretty apparent in the research, is what we would call technical failure versus absolute or super technical that's presented in the research is called momentary muscular failure. So the difference is like actually pretty straightforward. So technical failure means you basically can't do another rep on a set without your technique completely breaking down. Sure. This is pretty apparent. Like if you do pretty much any compound free weight movement, like you just can't get the bar up anymore. You're benching and you just can't lift. Actually, that would be more like momentary muscular failure. Technical failure mean if you did another rep, you could get it up, but you'd probably need some spotting and it would look not very good. So most research centers on what we call momentary muscular failure because it basically standardizes the set intensity. Because, you know, one of the, I guess you would say the advantages of training to failure is it standardizes the intensity of every set. You know when you can't physically perform another rep. Now, I would say that's probably not the best way to train 100% of the time at all. But at the very minimum, I would say like a benefit is you know what you're doing as opposed to, you know, technical failure. You might be able to do one, maybe two more reps, but it's not going to be with good technique. And at that point, is it really worth it? Because it could throw off your progression entirely and really increase the fatigue of that set and then maybe beyond that. So it basically just comes down to a trade-off of how intense should the set be. And, you know, usually I very much stray away from myself or any of my clients from training to all the way to momentary muscular failure, except if it's right before a deload period or a time where you're not going to be training, because at that point you don't have to worry about the fatigue that you get from that set.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, I was saying, is there like a generalized rep range for rep failure, or is that more individualized for that specific person? So is there like I don't know, for like me, you, Ruffy, I don't know, Annie, let's say LeBron too. Is there like 10 to 12, or is it like LeBron has a higher rep range for failure compared to me? I definitely would have a lower rep range.
And also, Jack, if you could also add on like how that ranges from like a rep failure ranges in a heavy load versus a light load. You know, if I'm doing like 170, 180 pound, 20 pounds of bench press versus 25 pound dumbbell curls, you know, how would that rep range differ based on the muscles?
Yeah, I would say to the first question. So basically, it sounds like you're asking is, so at a given training load, how many reps could I do versus how many you could do? And what we see is that does differ a lot between individuals.
Okay.
So, you know, for example, let's say you prescribe someone, you're going to perform a set of bench press at 80% of your one repetition max. So, you know, let's say we already calculated your 1 RM and we're going to put 80% of it on the bar. How many reps can you do? Yeah. Some people could do 10 reps with that, where other people might only be able to get 5 to 6.
Okay.
Which is why generally like just focusing on the fixed load on the bar isn't necessarily going to dictate how many reps you can do. It's really going to depend on what your individual capabilities are. Usually the more trained you get, the greater your work capacity is. So you're able to accumulate more reps with a given training load. But it really differs between individuals. And you see the same thing in terms of like, you know, how many reps can you get across sets? So some people, they can do a set of 10 with 80%. Their next set, they get 10. Third set, they get 9. Some people go like 10, 6, 3. So they get really fatigued after a given training set. So it definitely varies between individuals. So generally, if you're training with a heavy set, like closer to your 1 RM, it's not necessary for you to train all the way to failure. Whereas if you're doing a really high rep set, something like 20 to 30 reps, it's going to be more advisable to train closer to the point of like actual failure. So you're able to like maximize the amount of tension on basically all your muscle fibers is like the simplest way to explain it. Because if you're doing a heavy set, you're able to recruit those muscle fibers earlier in a set without training all the way to failure. But if you're doing a super lightweight, you know, this first 10 to 15 reps are going to feel like nothing. So basically to maximize the stimulus of any given training set, you're going to have to take that set almost to the point of failure. That's pretty well supported by a lot of the research we have comparing high versus low load training.
Now, how does this factor into the aspect of endurance versus building muscle? You know, because I know that, and then also building strength. I know that, you know, we have that the 3 to 5 rep range for building high strength, and then we have the higher rep range for building endurance and muscle building process. You know, so how does that differ, and why is there that they have these rep ranges? And what's the breakdown process when it comes to muscle building, endurance, and just strength?
Yeah, as you mentioned, kind of traditionally, strength would fall into a lower rep range with heavy reps, something like 1 to 5. Hypertrophy has been mentioned as something in the moderate rep range, 8 to 12. And endurance would be something higher reps, say 15 plus. That was kind of based on some very early research. More recent research suggests that's mostly true. But for example, we know for hypertrophy, you don't have to train in a very small fixed set of rep ranges to get similar growth. We've seen that you can get pretty similar growth training with pretty heavy weight, even as light as 3 to 5 reps, all the way up to 30 reps, and sometimes beyond that. But like I said, if you are going to train with a super lightweight, you're going to need to train pretty much to the point of failure. If you're training with a set of 5, you don't really need to go all the way to failure. With endurance, as you mentioned, it does seem that in general, it's more favorable to train with a higher rep range, and then also probably a shorter rest period as well. So a lot of those same principles hold true. And then, yeah, for strength, for the most part, if you're going to want to maximize dynamic strength, you're going to want to focus on what the principle of specificity. So you're going to want to train with a heavier load. So over the course of time, you're training in that 1 to 5 rep range, and you're focusing on increasing the load on a week-to-week basis in that given rep range. If you start training with sets of 10 to 15 to improve your 1RM, that basically violates the specificity principle, because you're not going to get a lot of those, what we call like the neural adaptations that contribute to the process of increasing strength.
And it's really interesting because I think we got all attested that when we first started in the gym, we're always trying to get that, get to see how much we can bench, the max that we can go, how quickly we can get to that. But then we have to realize that the first phase is you got to do the multiple reps over again, as you mentioned, for your body to adapt to it, the specificity of it. And then you grow into the strength phase. So I think unless you're like a crazy power lifter or someone who's specifically working for those, for a normal human being, I think a decent rep range of having multiple reps in would probably make more sense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's a bit of a pet peeve I kind of have when people are like, again, this is going to depend on your goals. Like I said, if you're a power lifter, you should spend the vast majority of your time training in the 1 to 10 rep range. Like if you're doing sets of 10 to 30, it's not a great use of your time for most of your training career. But for the average gym goer, for someone who has like body composition goals, I usually recommend something between 5 to 15 reps, which kind of maximizes the benefits of the moderate rep range. And it's not, something super light, which can be both really uncomfortable and also really hard to gauge the intensity of like a 20 rep set. So usually most of the time I recommend something in the moderate rep range. And then if you want to be able to venture out to heavier training, if that's something that you're interested in over time, then you're going to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
So Jack, going back on research, this is for me personally. When I started working out, even with RAF and even before, I didn't really know anything about the science behind it. I would just go to like LA Fitness or Lifetime or whatever, and 15-pound dumbbell. Okay, I'm doing 10 reps. Okay, then I like feel fine. Then I go up even more to 20, 25. But because you're so focused on research, when you have like a client, how do you convey like the jargon or like the really advanced topics and information to them? Do you want them to understand or how do you want them to understand their body and how their body works?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Part of being what we consider like an evidence-based fitness professional is being able to have a knowledge in the relevant scientific research on a given topic, but also be able to apply that to your specific client's situation. Yeah. So in general, I don't recommend like most trainers or coaches, like unless the client is someone who themselves is kind of familiar with the technical lingo, maybe they have a background in exercise science or nutrition. I don't think you necessarily have to be like super dumb it down to them, because sometimes that's even a bit offensive, but you probably don't need to talk in terms of like exercise physiology lingo either. So there has to be some sort of middle ground of you are giving them suggestions based on your interpretation of the research, but you're not overwhelming them with like complicated words, really complicated topics that can't be even like somewhat simplified. Because for the most part, for most of your clients, like you don't really need to be relying on super advanced training strategies that have conflicting research. You should be pretty well grounded in what the overall body of research shows for any given topic, and explaining and justifying how you're making your decisions for their training program based on what you know, and then also considering what their own situation is. Because as we've mentioned, everything's going to vary between individuals. So sometimes, even though the body of research suggests that one strategy is superior over another, that may not apply to your specific client. So it involves a lot of trial and error to figure out what works best for them.
Yeah. So you're just talking about like the more balanced approach, because even for me, like before, like I said, I didn't know anything about how like my muscles were working or whatever. I just wanted to see improvement as quickly as possible. But once I started working out with like even Ruffy, and he knows more about the body than I did, and he started explaining it to me, then it made sense. Like, okay, why am I sore after like the next day, or should I take it easy, or should I take it light, or do you know what I'm saying? So I guess yeah, the balanced approach is important, but I feel like after knowing, and I'm no expert, but after knowing more about how my body works, I feel like even going to the gym and even getting results was just way more efficient.
I definitely agree. Some people kind of push back on the idea of like they think like science-based training is just dumb, but I actually think it just gives you more confidence in the gym. Like
Yeah,
if you walk in with like an actual tangible program rather than like you said just picking up random weights, moving around random machines, your ability to stay consistent in the gym is so much higher. Like for me, I mean, at this point, I love training and like I like going into the gym, but I think what keeps me going in there is just like I walk in there knowing exactly what exercises I'm going to do, what rep range I'm going to use, how much weight I'm going to use,
yeah,
based on principles that I think work best for my goals. And I think that just helps me stay consistent rather than kind of going there being a little bit overwhelmed and trying a bunch of different things. And again, not only is it probably more optimal for my results, but it also gives me more confidence, like you said, like knowing like how I'm going to use my body for this movement, because
yeah.
there's like so many things you could do when you walk into that gym every day, and it's just good to just know what you're gonna do.
I,
Exactly, because there's so much information out there. I mean, you can go from like the average person next to you on the next bench, and he'll tell you something, and then there'll be like a bodybuilder like 2 feet away. He'll probably tell you something else. So just knowing that information, yeah, I completely agree. Because when I would go to the gym and I knew like, okay, this is what I have to do, then I didn't really. It's not like I like was. It's not like I tuned out other people's like information, but I was like more reliant on what I knew, and I stuck with that. And I think most people probably agree to that as well.
Yeah, it's good to have what I would just call like a principled approach to your training. So like you said, because there's gonna be differing opinions every time you
Yeah,
walk in there. But the reality is, depending on your results, there's a ton of different ways to get. There's no like perfect best training program. There's no perfect training split per se. It's going to be very contextualized to your specific goals. So if you just know the general principles, if you hear two different things from people at the gym, as long as you know that this is working well within the realm of possibilities of things that are probably effective, you don't feel overwhelmed because you just know,
yeah,
hey, for now I'm doing this. Maybe a month or two from now, I'll focus on that strategy instead because you're doing this for life, hopefully. So there's always time to focus on different training goals.
That's interesting. You just mentioned that how there's no perfect split, and that was one of our next questions. That what have you seen for an individual who just wants to be active? They don't want to be an athlete, they don't want to be a bodybuilder, they just want to be active. Like what split works best? I mean, I know you just mentioned again that there's no perfect split, but there's always the bro split. People look at bodybuilders and they go like, oh, Monday's chest day, Tuesday back day, and stuff like that. And then there's the upper body, lower body. There's the push pull
Right.
legs. So what have you seen for an avid gym goer who just wants to start getting in? What's like the ideal split for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually think for this specific question, there's not a perfect answer, but for the most part, with the assumption that this is someone who has general, body composition, health goals, they're new to resistance training. I typically recommend somebody focus on full body training, usually anywhere between 2 to 4 days per week, and utilizing majority of compound movements, because they're going to be the most time efficient. They're going to be the most bang for your buck because you're training multiple muscle groups at once. Also, those movement patterns are going to basically be the foundation for every kind of resistance training exercise. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be a barbell or a dumbbell movement, but if you have, some sort of squat pattern, hip hinge, vertical pulling exercise, horizontal pulling, horizontal press, you're basically going to train to some degree most of your major muscle groups. If you're and if you're at the beginner level, you don't need that much volume to see pretty good progress in strength and hypertrophy. So even if you're not directly doing bicep curls and tricep extensions, that doesn't mean you can't increase muscle growth or strength in your arms, as an example. So generally, I'm a pretty big fan of but I guess you consider higher frequency because it's not a bro split. I'm not a big fan of bro splits for people who are ranked beginners and just have general health goals. I think training a muscle group once per week actually could work for someone who's untrained, just because they don't need that much volume to grow. But as you get more advanced, you probably want to train with a higher frequency and spread that volume up further across the week with something like a push-pull legs or an upper lower. But I'm generally a fan of full body training, mostly compound movements. You can even utilize, with a lot of my personal training clients, I've used what's called antagonistic supersets, which is, essentially performing one exercise with one movement pattern and then resting a little bit, then doing another exercise with the opposing muscle group. So like a press and a row, or a squat and a leg curl as an example. Because while the one muscle group's resting, you can do an exercise for the opposing muscle groups. So it tends to be pretty time efficient, and you're also getting in really good quality work. And presumably, they're probably not going to have that much time either. Like, for me, I spend maybe 90 minutes in the gym, which is, not feasible for probably the person you're describing. So I actually think for that question, that's probably usually the best answer. If somebody comes to me though and says, I, want to maximize strength or muscle growth, then that's the plan's going to vary. Yeah. But if you just have general goals, I think usually full body training a few days per week works pretty well for that.
And you just mentioned that, and it's so true that new lifters or people who are completely new to it, for them, they see quick results, and then after a while, they hit a point where it's like, okay, now what do I do next? And then there's also another factor that a lot of personal trainers talk about is grow your arms. Like they'll give you specific tips to growing your arms, specific tips to growing your chest. Does that really is there any research based evidence or any scientific evidence showing that training one specific muscle in a specific way gives it more growth than the other body parts or other muscles?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's really not a lot of what we would what's called longitudinal research, which is just like long-term training studies on exercise selection. So like just comparing like what's better for your chest, your bench press or cable flies. Sure. And the reality is, we know for like muscle growth, it's highly unlikely that any given exercise is inherently better than another. You can use dumbbells, barbells, machines, and really get similar growth, because the reality is muscle growth is essentially how I describe this, like a tension derived adaptation. So regardless of where that tension is coming from, it can be from dumbbells, machines, cables, whatever it is. You need to get tension on your muscle fibers. And it doesn't necessarily have to be from any one given exercise. A lot of exercises just fit someone's structure really well, and they get a really good stimulus. They get a really good mind-muscle connection. Whereas for others, it doesn't work well. So really, when it comes to exercise selection for muscle growth, you have to individualize that towards what works best for you. And related to that, I guess becomes a question of like, how much variety do you need for any given muscle? For chest, like, do you need to do like 7 chest exercises, or can you just bench? There actually is some emerging research on that topic. There's been a couple of studies looking at, how much exercise variety benefits muscle growth. And what we see is usually just one exercise per muscle group probably isn't totally sufficient if you want to maximize muscle growth across the entire region of the muscle. So some muscles have like individual regions, and different muscle actions train them well. So in that case, it's advisable to have probably at least 2, sometimes 3, depending on the muscle, exercises in order to maximize growth across the entire muscle. So what we see is kind of just summarizing in general, you probably don't want to do just one exercise for one muscle group, but you also do need to do, 5 to 10, especially for any one given training cycle. Like that's essentially just useless and probably counterproductive in the long run. What makes a lot more sense is to take in a given training cycle, do, 1 to 3 exercises per muscle group. And then maybe in a couple months, you switch that up, sub one exercise out for the other, and then kind of just repeat that process over time. So you're incorporating some variety, but you're not just overwhelming yourself unnecessarily. Because outside of more than a couple exercises per muscle group, you're not really like maximizing the growth of any particular region.
Sure, that makes sense. And yeah, that makes sense. And now we're talking about like the term for that would be the novel, getting the new stimulus for each muscle group. And now, how does that factor into there's a lot of sometimes, like for example, for myself, this is personal, it's like I'll see that when I'm working out, my right bicep or my left bicep is larger or has more growth than the other bicep. How does that work? And like how does that happen? And surprisingly, I would assume that it's because I'm right-handed. It should be the opposite, but for me, I'm right-handed and my left bicep is like bigger than my right. So does that come into play because of the fact that there's only one workout that you're doing over and over again, or does that have to do something with like the rep ranges? How does that factor in? What does research tell us?
Yeah, that is really interesting. Sometimes it's going to be determined by like baseline genetics, like, but kind of surprising, like you said in that example, you would think like maybe your right arm would be bigger than your left arm if that's your dominant arm.
It's a common thing. A lot of people have that issue, that especially I think in arms, that they notice that
Yeah,
my right is bigger than my left. Yeah.
Could come down to training technique. Presumably you're doing mostly like bilateral movements, like you're training both arms at once. If you're doing that, you're probably going to expect like similar growth in the long run, and you're probably it's probably relatively similar. But you even see in research like if they measure muscle thickness of both arms of someone in a training study, for example, sometimes one arm does grow even to a significant degree more than the other one. It could be somewhat related to training technique. Sometimes just the stimulus that you're applying for, depending on the movement you're doing, is just you're getting so much more tension in one muscle or to one side of the muscle compared to the other. So it's probably going to come down to a combination of like baseline factors and also like technique for the exercises you're doing. So when I talk about like regional muscles, what I'm referring to more is like so for example, like your shoulders, you have like three heads. You have like the anterior deltoid, the lateral deltoid, and the posterior deltoid. So you're just doing a shoulder press variation is probably not going to maximize growth of like the posterior deltoid, for example. So you're going to need to do like an isolation exercise for in order to get similar growth for that particular region. And you do see that a lot in people and in research. Like, some people have one region of a muscle developed a lot more, and it's probably going to be because of the exercises they're doing. Like if you're only ever do incline bench press, you're probably going to have a much larger upper chest than lower chest, as an example. And that applies to a lot of different exercises and muscle groups. So it's probably mostly going to come down to your exercise selection, but maybe also your technique as well.
Wait, going back to that the arm disparity. So yeah, even with me, I think I did like some body scan at Crunch, and it said like my right bicep was bigger than my left bicep. So then I think someone told me was like if you're doing like a curl, just do like a couple more reps with your left with my left arm each time I do the exercise, and it'll even out. Is that a myth or is that true?
Yeah, I mean, hypothetically, that's possible. Whether you do a couple more reps with that arm, or you use a little bit more load, like, because sometimes what I see relatively common in individuals, especially people who are beginners, is it's sometimes like a muscle size difference between one arm and another, but a lot of times it's the strength of one arm is entirely different from the other. Like I've had clients where we're doing a chest press. This is really easy to see in a chest press because you'll see one of their triceps give out on the press way before the other one, and it's usually because one arm is just way stronger than the other, which is probably due to some baseline characteristic, assuming that they've never trained before. So like for your example, I mean unilateral training makes a lot more sense, training one arm at once. So whether it's using a little bit more load for that arm, doing another set, like one more set for that arm compared to the other arm, or using or just doing a couple more reps closer to failure. If you want to correct some of those muscles asymmetries, that's probably a good training strategy. But like you said, unless you get like some sort of scan at the gym, or a DEXA scan or whatever, it's kind of hard to notice that unless you have like some sort of like raw numbers to compare them to.
And I think we see this a lot in bodybuilders, especially those that compete, Mr. Olympia and that level, that they, I think, have this issue of like one muscle being developed than the other, and then they work towards making sure that it is all symmetrical, it's all in that same shape. Because I think for them, as you mentioned, it's a common thing because of the heavy load that they have in building the muscle. It's probably some underlying characteristics that come into play. And does that Jack, does that also factor into, like, I know we're talking about biceps because they're like small muscles. It's the same thing with your legs, with your calves and stuff. Is that more genetics? Like, because I've heard that, no matter what, and you can see this with like soccer players. That's the example that comes to mind. Even certain sprinters, they run, it's all lower body work, but their calves are not as, developed as they should be. They have the strength, yes, they have the speed, but how does that factor in? Is it again due to genetics, or is it like just a muscular trait that comes in?
Yeah, what we see is a lot of, baseline muscle growth. So how much muscle growth does someone have even before they start training? That's going to be highly genetic. So like you said, you guys have probably seen the people who have never lifted before, but they're just like huge, right? Like even if they've never done like formal training, and there's other individuals who have trained for a while and they just can't seem to get really any significant growth. And a lot, we've seen in research, like sometimes researchers will classify some people as like really high responders to resistance training, and some people are low responders. So, we talked about at the beginning, you give someone a given training dose, and some people are just able to grow really easily from that training stimulus, whereas other people don't see any growth at all. And a lot of that is going to be genetic. And you'll even see like a lot of the top bodybuilders who, obviously are enhanced individuals, but even before they're enhanced, you look at pictures of them, like they're like super jacked, like even before any anabolics and maybe even any structured training, they have a lot of baseline muscle mass that's definitely genetic. Sometimes it's just from sport specific training. So people who are doing football, for example, or maybe a high contact sport that does involve a lot of muscular work. Even see some people who have like active jobs, like construction workers. They have just like a pretty good amount of muscle mass, even just from the kind of day-to-day work that they do. Whereas someone who comes from more of like a sedentary background, they're, probably not going to have a similar physique. So we see baseline muscle mass is like largely genetic, but your ability to gain muscle over time, everybody pretty much to some extent has the ability to do that. Now, how much you gain over the course of a lifetime is going to vary, but usually you can make tweaks within your training program to get growth to any one muscle. It might just be poor technique, not enough volume for a given muscle, sometimes too much volume for a given muscle. So all of those factors like really come into play. But it's definitely a combination of genetics and also environmental conditions.
So would you say that muscle size or muscle mass does not dictate how strong a person is?
That's a super good question. It's interesting because that's like actually in my specific graduate program, and actually one of my professors in my program, that's like the main focus of his research is how much does an increase in muscle size increase to muscle strength. And so mechanistically, we see that a bigger muscle is able to produce more force, like per unit of muscle size, which hypothetically should translate to greater strength gains over time. And we also see that like the largest individuals, like the example is like sumo wrestlers who just have like the most amount of mass. They also have the most amount of fat-free mass. And powerlifters and Olympic weightlifters who are very strong, we see in some like correlational data that they also have the highest levels of fat-free mass. But like interestingly, in a lot of training studies, some evidence from like my professor, my program that he's conducted in his research lab has failed to show a correlation in, more like basic individuals, like, university students who's usually like the subjects in these studies. They failed to see a correlation between increase in muscle size and strength. So kind of the debate is still out there. My opinion based on kind of the weight of the evidence. And like I said, you look just with, the largest individuals are also usually the strongest individuals, but that's not usually the case. We see that there's, you see in powerlifting, even people who don't have the most amount of muscle mass who can still squat and deadlift, way more than someone who's a lot heavier than them. And that's because a lot of the adaptations to strength training are neural, and they're related to the nervous system. And it's not just due to muscle mass. So, muscle mass does seem to be a predictor of strength, but it's definitely not the only factor that goes into that. There's a lot of different factors for how someone gets stronger. And it's really interesting how, that's a growing body of research.
And the reason why I asked that is because I have a few friends who've never worked out. They've never done anything, but then when they're in the gym or like worked out once in a while, they're actually pretty strong. They can deadlift a good amount, they can bench a good amount. And that's what surprised me, because when you look at them, they're not like the fittest person. They barely have any muscle mass. They're not in shape, but then they have that strength in itself. So I was just curious. And the same thing with, you have the strongmen, you got Brian Shaw, Eddie Hall, like they have those huge bodies, but then
Yes.
again, there's like
Yeah.
a crazy amount of strength that, so they don't have so as you mentioned, muscular size does not necessarily dictate it, but does play a huge factor in it.
Yeah, it definitely does. Because like even like the strong men, like they have a ton of fat mass on them. Like they're carrying a lot of weight, but they have, if you took any sort of body composition measurement of them, they're gonna have some of the highest skeletal muscle mass compared to anybody in the world, even more than a lot of the professional bodybuilders. So there's certainly some degree of correlation. The question is, how much is muscle growth causative of increases in strength over time? And that seems to be kind of an emerging body of research. We know that in beginners, a lot of the gains they see early on are it's somewhat due to you're as a beginner, you do see get the newbie gains, you do get increases in muscle size, but it's also largely due to adaptations to your nervous system and even adaptations like in the brain that help you get stronger as well. So it's a combination of like fat-free mass, muscle mass, but also nervous system is a really good example. But also sometimes it's like an individual's structure and their biomechanics. Some people are just built really well to deadlift and to squat, and they're able to use heavy loads early on in their training. Whereas for some people, those lifts just don't fit their structure well. They have poor mobility, things like that, and it just prevents them from ever getting really strong in one exercise.
That's really interesting.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I kind of want to talk about the science behind sleep. We all know, like, most people will go to the gym and they'll, have a good diet, but, because of school or work or, even because of so much technology, we're sleeping later and we're waking up earlier. So can you talk about how important sleep is to building muscle and recovery, and just like this, just the science behind that?
Now, Jack, before you answer that, I want to mention a quick point that just came to my mind. That so I'm using this. It's a Whoop. You probably might have heard of it, right?
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm using that. Now, the interesting is, it's been a month for me since I'm using this, and there's certain days that if I get good sleep,
Mm-hmm.
I sleep late, and if I get like about 7, 8 hours in, it'll tell me my body is fully recovered. And
Mm-hmm.
there's certain days that if I don't get enough sleep, it'll tell me my body's not recovered. Now, the interesting thing is that the days that it tells me my body is fully recovered, I don't feel as energetic.
Mm.
I feel like I could still use some more sleep. I feel like I could still use rest. Even if it's like a day that I'm supposed to work out, my body still tells me that, you're not supposed to work out, even though the Whoop tells me otherwise. So how does that factor in, like, in your research and what you have seen? Like, how does sleep play a role in how your body actually feels versus how much you can exert and actually go
Right.
through it on that day?
Yeah. In general, like sleep's super important, both from a recovery perspective and then also probably in the long term for strength and muscle growth. And I'll talk about just a couple different areas of research for why that might be the case. First, for your example, I think the thing about sleep is there's kind of like two aspects of it. There's like the subjective aspect of like you said. So you saying, how well do you feel? Like even if you've gotten a lot of sleep, sometimes you still don't feel totally right. And sometimes people, you don't get a lot of sleep the night before, but you wake up and you feel fine. And what I've seen in the research pretty much overall is like on an acute basis. So like 1 or 2 nights of poor sleep, it actually doesn't seem to have a really negative impact on training performance, like for a day or two. But over the course of time, it does seem to have pretty negative effects on your strength and your recovery. And then also the opposite is true. So, I've seen a couple studies where, you take athletes and they're sleeping, let's say 7 to 8 hours on average per night. And then the researchers will have them extend their sleep, usually like by 1 to 2 hours per night. And, they track them over the course of time and they see that both their performance improves as well as their subjective measures of recovery. Like how well do they feel throughout the day? How's their energy? How's their appetite? Things like that. So we see both of those factors seem to be true. From a muscle growth perspective, there's not a lot of like long-term studies on how much like you get 7 versus 9 hours of sleep, do you get more muscle growth one way? But we have seen a couple studies where you restricting sleep decreases muscle protein synthesis, which in the long term is a pretty good predictor of how much muscle growth you are, because it's kind of like that acute process that regulates how much muscle you build over the course of time. And there's also been a couple of really interesting studies that have looked at how much you sleep during a weight loss diet affects the amount of weight you lose from lean mass versus fat mass. Because obviously we basically when we lose weight, we want to lose fat, right? There's been a couple studies that have shown when you restrict your sleep, you actually lose a greater proportion of your mass from fat-free mass, which might be muscle mass. It's also, it's a couple other things, as opposed to fat mass, which obviously is like unfavorable. And it's tough to figure out like exactly why that is the case. Like, what are the mechanisms why sleeping less exactly decreases muscle mass and might increase or decrease the amount of fat loss you lose and increase the amount of muscle you lose. But it may come back to, like I said, muscle protein synthesis. There's a couple of studies that have shown you that decreases over time in that, you sleep only 5 hours per night, for example. So in general, like you said, a lot of people, they're focusing on their training and their nutrition, but they don't prioritize the recovery at all. And then they wonder why, like, they're not making any gains in the gym. A lot of times they're just not sleeping enough. And sometimes it's also because the quality of their sleep isn't enough. Like you said, we live in this like highly technological society now. People are using computers and smartphones late at night. And those seem to have a negative effect on your sleep quality and your ability to get into deep REM sleep. Yeah. So I always implore people to focus, yes, on the amount of sleep you get per night. Most people, that's going to be 7 to 9 hours. It's like the general recommendation. Some people need more than that. And also the quality of your sleep. So trying to limit your technology use at night and, not doing anything super stimulating at night, trying to just relax like an hour or two before bed and sleeping in a cool room. All those things can help also increase the quality of your sleep. So, you basically get more bang for your buck overnight.
It's
so
interesting you mentioned that. Important. It's interesting you mentioned that because for me, my Whoop tells me that I need at least 8 to 9.5 hours of sleep. And I would not, like, for me, it's just because sleep is so crucial at that point. The days that I don't get it, I'm still feeling good. So as you mentioned, 1 or 2 days might not make a difference. Yeah. And it brings me to think about people like Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. Like, every time he posts about how busy his schedule is, he has like 4 hours of sleep. Like but I think maybe because of the fact that he's on supplements and that allows him to maintain his muscle mass and keep that strength. Because as you mentioned, it may be completely difficult for someone at that level on a regular basis have 3-4 hours of sleep.
Right. Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of like kind of the grind culture of like it's people like that or other people are like, like sleep like 4 hours per night. And maybe that works for them. Like you said, there's different factors for why that might work for them. But for most people, like I don't know. I think some people think like, oh, I can survive on like 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and you definitely can for a night or two. Like, it's not the worst thing in the world, but anything beyond that, it's really poor idea for your overall health. Also, I mean, again, we could talk about for performance in the gym, which it does seem to be a factor, but from an overall health perspective too, sleep is one of the most powerful things you can do naturally to basically enhance your recovery and for a wide variety of health markers improve that. So yeah, it's. Honestly, I don't think there's enough research to be like, if you sleep 6 hours per night, you're going to get way less muscle growth than someone who sleeps 8 hours per night. But like, it's more like the extreme ends of that, where I think like if you're chronically sleep deprived, you're going to be in bad shape. If you're like chronically like sleeping like 10 hours per night, like honestly, that might improve your strength to small, but maybe meaningful extent over time.
Just a fun fact that came to mind is that Cristiano Ronaldo, he doesn't sleep much at night. He only gets 5 to 6 hours of sleep, but he takes like about 3 to 4 hour and a half naps throughout the day. So
I know a lot of professional athletes do that because their games are at night. So like they wake up at like, so, and usually their games are at night. So they go to bed later. They go to bed at like 1 a.m. or something like that. So they'll sleep in, or maybe they don't sleep in, whatever. They get up and then it's like, well, what am I supposed to do all day? I don't have like a game till like 7 o'clock. So like I know LeBron too, like always takes like a pregame nap for a couple hours even, because it just works better for their schedule. So yeah.
One important question that I haven't. I'm pretty sure Raf has as well. Is that currently right now, me and Rafi are fasting, and especially Muslims who fast during Ramadan, they want to. They like we all think that like okay, if I'm fasting, so I'm not really eating food, and I'm gonna let me go to the gym like maybe an hour or hour and a half before I break my fast, and let me do like fasted cardio. That will really accelerate my weight loss. Is that a myth, or is there any science behind that?
Yeah, based on what I've looked into, there's essentially like very little research in the long term on that topic. I'm aware of one study essentially that's looked at fasted versus fed cardio and the long term and the effects on fat loss over time. And essentially, when calories are equated over the course of time, there doesn't seem to be any significant differences between whether you do your cardio fasted or with a meal in you, as long as you're eating the same amount of calories and your energy expenditure is the same over the course of a day. I will say that I have seen a couple of studies that have shown that fasted cardio it may increase fat oxidation, or like the breakdown of fatty acids for fuel, which is called lipolysis.
Yeah.
But that's different than actually breaking down like adipose tissue, like fat mass, which is what we all care about. So a lot of times, people will be like, I'm doing fasted cardio to lose more fat, and you may be burning more fat for fuel, but you're not necessarily going to lose more fat mass over the course of time, independent of your daily calorie intake. And I'll actually say, like, depending on what your training modality is, I'm not a huge fan of people training fasted if they can avoid it, for a couple of reasons. There's been a couple studies that I've seen in the past couple of years that have shown that training in a fasted state it decreases muscle protein synthesis and increases muscle protein breakdown after a training session, which is obviously not ideal if you have goals for muscle and strength. I mean, you can largely offset that just by just having a protein shake after your workout or just having a regular meal. But if you're fasting right now for Ramadan or whatever other situation, if you just can't have a meal, I'm not a huge fan of training fasted and not being able to have anything afterwards. I don't think that's going to get you your best results. So sometimes I actually kind of think the opposite approach. It might be better to have some, even if it's a small meal in your system, like some protein and carbs to fuel your workout and also increase protein synthesis after that workout.
Well, that's what. Well, what I was trying to say is that most people do it like an hour right before they break, so they won't have food.
Right.
When they're but then they'll definitely eat that big meal right after their workout to break it.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I actually think I think the reason why that's so popular, with kind of works well from your scheduling perspective. You get up in the morning and you just want to be productive. So you go to your cardio for 30 minutes or whatever, and then you come back and you have your breakfast afterwards. So it just works better than having to force feed yourself and then feel maybe bloated or maybe you have some gastrointestinal issues and then going to do your cardio afterwards. You usually just subjectively feel better just on a lighter stomach training. So I think that's why it's really popular. And I think it works well for a lot of people. I just don't think there's anything magical about it per se from a fat loss.
Also is the fact that these are the people that work out multiple times throughout the day. They have 2-3 times a day they do the gym session, so they can split it up in a really convenient way.
Yes, yeah, you're right. For some people, it just fits their schedule better. For some people, it doesn't. I think I know if you're a busy professional and you work a 9 to 5. Usually you're going to train in the morning, and a lot of times it's going to be fasted because you just don't have time to make your breakfast. Yeah. So you do your cardio, and then you can eat breakfast, and you go to work, and maybe you train afterwards. But if you have a flexible schedule, I think it's awesome. But if not, it's not that big of a deal.
Awesome. And I know, Jack, we touched a lot about muscle building, muscle rep ranges, sleep. I want to quickly touch upon before we wrap up which is one of the crucial things we talked about earlier, is as an athlete and someone as a strength and conditioning coach, someone who probably works a lot with these, is injuries, right? How does someone coming from an injury or recovering from an injury, what would you recommend for them? How hard should they go, or how should they take it easy? What's the rep? Is there a recommended rep range for them? Should they focus on strength? Should they focus on endurance? What have you seen in your experience, and what would you recommend for a general person who's just coming back from an injury and wants to get back into it?
It's going to depend a lot on where the injury took place, what muscle or area got strained, whatever. It depends on what the injury is, because the majority of the time you're going to be able to work around the injury. But if you have super major injury, it's going to be completely different. Like it's going to be a different recovery process from someone with a torn ACL compared to someone with a strained shoulder. So, generally, like if it's some sort of like upper body injury and it's not super major, it's usually pretty easy to train around because you're going to be able to do. I'm a big fan of like unilateral exercises as you're recovering from an injury, because actually, so let's say you have one side of your body injured, but the other side's not. You could just train with the one side of the body, and there does seem to be some sort of cross potentiation effects, formerly what it's called, whatever, where essentially you can maybe even maintain strength on one side of the body, even just by progressively training the other side that's not injured. So I'm a pretty big fan of unilateral work for somebody coming off an injury. Some other things for exercise prescription, I think people should probably come back training with pretty low training volumes. So, just a couple of sets for the muscle group or whatever that's injured. You probably don't need to train the rest of your body that differently. I wouldn't completely overdo it because then that might hamper your recovery from the area that is injured. But I think you should really get in there, just do a couple of hard sets. A lot of unilateral movements work pretty well, and just gradually progress the training intensity over time until you get to a point where that whatever area is injured is not limiting you in your overall training performance. But yeah, I do think a lot of people, they get injured and then they get really flustered, and then when they do come back, they just kind of want to hammer it. And sometimes, sometimes too, muscles or an area is not going to be completely recovered even when you start training. So you really want to very much ease into things. And the really good news is you can maintain most of your strength and muscle with very little training volume and load, like just a couple of hard sets per week. And you're going to be able to maintain a lot of the muscle and strength you have in that area anyway. So you don't need to, like, even just from a physiological perspective, worry about you losing all of your progress if you do get a specific area injured. Like, just, take a deep breath and focus on the other types of exercise you are able to do. And when you can train that area again, gradually ease into it over time with movements that fit your structure well, essentially.
You just mentioned that, and that as soon as you mentioned the chest injury and working with one side, the most recent injury of Ryan Crowley, I don't know if you've seen the video when he was in the incline.
Yeah.
And then I was watching his rehab process. That's what he was doing. He was working on the other side.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it kind of like stimulates the injured side as well. So that's really interesting fact that you brought up.
Yeah, there does seem to be, and it seems prudent for both, like the upper and lower body. Yeah, for the pecs, it probably works pretty well. Even for like if you have a quad injury or something like that, if you're able to do like unilateral leg extensions, which are like a relatively common like a rehab exercise or something of that nature, you could probably maintain a lot of your size and strength in that other area. So it's kind of like a good bang for your buck way to train as well. But we were talking about earlier people who might have like deficiencies, whereas one muscle is bigger or stronger than the other just naturally. And that's another reason why unilateral training is really good for those people, because it may even be preventative, because sometimes injuries happen in training just because one side's more dominant than the other. And then, depending on the exercise you're doing, you take a set to failure, and that as the example for that chest injury, he was doing like I think he's doing like a 5-plate incline bench. And one side just completely compensated, and then his pec just tore like right off of his bone. So sometimes it's just, one muscle's weaker than the other, which is a good reason why you should pay attention to your potential muscle asymmetries over the course of time in your training.
That's crazy. Once again, Jack, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking your time to be with us. Now, before we quickly wrap up, I have 2 questions for you. Yeah. Number one is some of your recommendations that you would say for people to get the reps as close to failure. What are some recommendations? What are some ways that people can achieve the rep failure to grow their muscles or build muscle?
Yeah, so I would say so what I said at the beginning, I think the most basic way to think about failure training is it definitely does not seem to be necessary to train all the way to failure for all of your sets, whether you're using light or heavy loads. If you like to train to failure, and you're using light loads, I'm a pretty big fan of that. I think that if you're doing sets of 15 to 30, it doesn't make sense to stop really like 4 to 5 reps short of failure. I think you really want to try to pretty much push those sets pretty much close to the point of failure. And sometimes it's tough to gauge that. the easiest way to do that is train till you think you can't do any more reps and write that number down, right? Write down, like, I used 50 pounds for 25 reps. And next time you do that exercise, just try to do a little bit more. Just try to do a little bit more over time. And eventually you're going to get to the point where you know that you're training close to the point of failure. If you're somebody that uses heavy loads, I'm not a big fan of people training to failure very frequently for every set. So if you're doing sets of like 3 to 10 reps, as an example, I would do maybe half or 3/4 of your sets, 1 to 2 reps shy of failure, and then maybe doing, if we brought at the very beginning like an AMRAP set, doing something like that every week or every month or so for a given movement, just to be able to test your strength capabilities. But outside of that, I would stick a couple reps short of failure for most of your sets.
And would you also say that like eccentric and concentric movements and like pauses or like reducing rest times, is that also some of the ways that people can achieve rep failure?
Oh, yes, that's a really good idea. That's a good way to, so like an intensity technique. Yeah. So like a drop set, superset. I'm actually for people who are time constrained. Are you guys familiar with myo reps? Have you guys ever heard of that?
Yes, I've heard about it.
Okay. Yeah. So myo reps are pretty awesome because you basically do one set close to failure. You rest for a few seconds. And at that point, you're already going to be pretty close to failure just a few reps later because you're already super fatigued. So you're getting multiple sets close to failure, which is a good stimulus for growth, but it's also super time efficient. Like you can do like 5 myo rep sets in like 5 minutes, as opposed to doing like one normal set and then resting for 3 minutes, right? It's just very time efficient. So I think people who are very time constrained should consider some intensity techniques where they're basically training to failure more often, just in a shorter period of time.
Awesome. Now, the second question for you, Jack, is one person, dead or alive, that you want to train or work out with.
One person, dead or alive. That's really tough. Does it have to be an athlete, a famous person? It could be anybody.
Anyone that you aspire to work with or train with. Could be a bodybuilder, could be an athlete, could be a boxer, anything.
I would say, I know we said him a couple times. My favorite athlete's probably LeBron James. I'm a pretty big fan of him, and even though, because I was thinking of somebody, we train for different goals. Because he trains for basketball, I train mostly for muscle growth, so it's a little bit different. But just from the perspective of being able to spend like an hour in the gym with him and just see the mannerisms of the way he does train, the way he goes about his workouts, I think would be very motivational and maybe also educational as well. I'd learn something from him. He's a lot bigger than me, but he's like my favorite athlete, so I'm probably going to say him.
That's amazing. Now, Jack, where can people find you if they want to work with you? And also, you want to touch a little bit on your internship right now with Stronger by Science with Greg and Eric, or was that a recent thing? How has your experience been? Just a quick brief so people can find you and get in there.
Yeah, so my Instagram is just my name, Jack Quint, and then fitness at the end. So just my name and then fitness. And yeah, so I did an internship with the guys at Stronger by Science. It was super amazing, actually, for like school credit, which is like a really cool perk of my master's program, is I was able to get school credit while working for them. So now I also do like, if you see their Instagram page, I make some of their infographics and some of their YouTube videos. So Greg and Eric are awesome guys, and I've loved working with them. I also, if you go to my Instagram, my bio, I did write an article a few months ago on training to failure with Adam, who's the head of scifit.net. And if you want to just read more in depth about some of the nuances of training to failure, that's a really good article we put together. And I'm actually going to be putting out some more articles with Adam over the course of the year. So I'll be posting those to my Instagram as well.
Okay, awesome. That's really awesome. And again, I personally learned a lot from your Instagram. Definitely learned a lot from Stronger by Science. So if you're someone that, again, we try to get a lot of research-based and evidence-based people on here. So definitely Jack is one of them, and he does really good work in putting out the information in the most simplified way possible. So Jack, thank you once again for taking our time to being here with us, and we'll look forward to hosting you again.
Yes, thank you guys so much for having me on, and I would be happy to come back on anytime. So thank you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Yep.